Why no contact hits the avoidant harder than you think. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like the more you pulled away, the less they seemed to care? Like you were screaming in silence, hoping your absence would shake them, only to be met with nothing? Let's talk about it. Because the truth is, no contact isn't just about getting someone back. But here's what most people don't realize. When you go no contact with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, you're not playing games. You're removing yourself from a dynamic where you were always chasing, always proving, always trying to earn what should have been freely given: love, attention, commitment. Now, an avoidant person is someone who craves intimacy, but fears it at the same time. So the moment they start to feel emotionally close, they pull back. They disconnect to feel safe. And if you're constantly there, texting, reassuring, reaching out, they never have to feel the consequence of losing you. But when you step away, really step away, not to manipulate, but to protect your peace, something happens. For the first time, the avoidant is left with silence. And in that silence, they're confronted with the absence of the thing they took for granted. You. They may not respond immediately. They may even look unbothered. But inside, that void starts to feel real, because your presence was their comfort and your absence is now their wake-up call. But here's the catch. This isn't about them waking up. It's about you waking up to the fact that you never needed to chase someone emotionally unavailable to prove your worth. So if you're sitting there wondering whether your silence is making a difference, it is, not just in them, but in you. And that's the kind of transformation that actually lasts. No contact isn't a tactic, it's an act of self-respect. Too often, people enter no contact with a hidden agenda, hoping that silence will somehow make the other person miss them, feel guilty, or come running back. But when you're dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, entering no contact with manipulation in mind usually backfires, emotionally and mentally. The deeper truth is this: no contact is not about them. It's about choosing yourself in a situation where you've repeatedly been made to feel like your needs are too much, your love is overwhelming, or your presence is somehow a burden. You're not cutting communication to punish. You're stepping away because begging for attention or chasing breadcrumbs of affection is eroding your self-worth. When you decide to go no contact with someone who emotionally withdraws every time you show up with vulnerability or closeness, you are finally listening to the part of yourself that's exhausted, the part that's been tolerating emotional inconsistency, the part that's been dimming its needs just to keep the peace. You've tried everything: talking calmly, showing understanding, giving space, even apologizing for things that weren't your fault. But the dynamic never truly shifted. At some point, you realize that the only thing left to do isn't to say something louder, it's to say nothing at all. Not as a form of power play, but as a release. The reason this is an act of self-respect is because it requires you to sit in your own discomfort. You'll want to reach out. You'll wonder if they're thinking of you. You'll have moments where you convince yourself that maybe if you just said the right thing, they'd finally understand how much you care. But self-respect is doing what's right for your emotional health, even when it's hard. It's choosing short-term pain over long-term damage. Because every time you chase someone who makes you feel invisible, you teach your nervous system to accept anxiety as a baseline for love. And that's not love. That's survival mode. When you go no contact, you're not building a wall, you're setting a boundary. You're saying, I'm not available for love, that makes me shrink. I'm not going to keep proving myself to someone who won't even meet me halfway. And when the avoidant notices the shift, and yes, they usually do, even if they don't show it, it's not because they suddenly realized you were the one, it's because your silence disrupted a pattern where they always had the upper hand. But again, that's not the point. The real shift isn't in how they respond, it's in how you show up for yourself. No contact is self-respect in its rawest form. Quiet, uncomfortable, but powerful. It's not about silence for reaction, it's about silence for healing. And that's the most radical thing you can do in a world that teaches you to chase love even when it costs you your peace. Avoidant individuals are often misunderstood, especially in romantic relationships. On the surface, they may appear cold, distant, or uninterested. But underneath that emotional detachment is a very real internal conflict. A deep desire for connection mixed with an overwhelming fear of it. They crave love, intimacy, and closeness, just like anyone else. But the moment they start to feel too emotionally exposed, their instinct is to retreat. This push-pull dynamic can be incredibly confusing to the person on the receiving end, who may think they did something wrong or that the avoidant simply doesn't care. But in most cases, it's not a lack of interest, it's fear. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of losing independence, and fear of not being enough once someone truly gets close. This internal tug of war is rooted in their attachment style, usually developed in early childhood. Maybe they grew up in environments where emotional expression was discouraged, or where love was conditional, given only when they were perfect or useful. So, they learn that closeness can be dangerous, unpredictable, or even suffocating. As adults, this can show up in relationships as emotional withdrawal, inconsistency, or a tendency to downplay feelings. They might say things like, "I'm just not ready for a relationship," or "I need space." Not because they don't care, but because their nervous system is wired to view closeness as a threat. What makes this even more complex is that many avoidants are attracted to people who are more emotionally expressive and open. Initially, this can feel exciting, even safe. Someone is finally doing the emotional lifting for them, but once that intimacy deepens and the relationship starts demanding more emotional presence, their walls go up. It's not because you ask for too much, it's because they've hit their threshold, and their instinct is to protect themselves by pulling away. Understanding this dynamic doesn't mean you have to accept it or stay in it, but it does help to depersonalize their behavior. Their withdrawal isn't a direct reflection of your worth or your value. It's a survival mechanism that they've relied on for years. That said, it's not your job to fix it. Love doesn't work when only one person is willing to show up fully. You can't do the emotional labor for both people and expect to feel fulfilled. When you see that avoidant people crave connection but fear it at the same time, you start to understand why no contact can be so powerful. It forces them to sit in the discomfort they usually run from. It brings the emotional consequences of their distance to the surface, but more importantly, it gives you the clarity to stop internalizing their behavior and start choosing relationships that offer you safety, not confusion. Because even if they have genuine feelings for you, their fear of intimacy will keep blocking the very connection they want, unless they're willing to confront it. And that's something only they can do. One of the biggest mistakes people make when dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style is thinking that more reassurance will fix the problem. It's natural. When someone pulls away or becomes emotionally distant, the instinct is to lean in, to offer more love, more attention, more understanding. You think maybe if I just show them how much I care, they'll stop running. But this approach usually has the opposite effect. Constant reassurance, even when well-intentioned, actually enables avoidance. It allows the avoidant person to stay emotionally disengaged while still receiving the benefits of your emotional labor. Here's how it plays out. The avoidant partner pulls back. You sense the distance and feel anxious, so you reach out more, try harder, soften your boundaries, and over-communicate. They don't have to do much. They know you'll be there, reaching out, keeping the connection alive, managing the emotional weight of the relationship. In this setup, the avoidant doesn't feel the discomfort of true disconnection because you never really let go. You become the emotional anchor in the relationship while they float in and out, depending on their comfort level. This not only drains you, but also keeps them from facing the consequences of their emotional withdrawal. Every time you feel this way, you will no longer be the emotional anchor. In a healthy relationship, both people are emotionally present, even when it's uncomfortable. But when you're the one constantly giving reassurance, you're essentially oversumptioning. You're compensating for their lack of emotional availability by pouring more of yourself into the connection, your time, your energy, your vulnerability. And this dynamic is exhausting. It puts you in a position where you start to feel like love has to be earned, as if your value is directly tied to how well you can manage their fear or soothe their discomfort. That's not love. That's emotional codependency, master's devotion. Avoidant individuals don't change because you loved them harder or gave them more chances. They only begin to reassess their behavior when they experience a loss or emotional consequence that disrupts their usual pattern. And that won't happen if you're always cushioning the impact. The more you stay in the cycle of over-reassuring and over-giving, the more you delay the moment they might actually look inward and ask themselves why they keep pushing people away. What's even more important is what constant reassurance does to you. It teaches you to mistrust your own needs. You start to believe that needing consistency, clarity, or emotional intimacy makes you too much. You start minimizing your feelings just to keep the peace. Over time, you lose the very parts of yourself that make you feel strong and grounded in a relationship. Your voice, your standards, your boundaries. Breaking this cycle isn't about playing games or using reverse psychology. It's about respecting yourself enough to stop doing the emotional work for two people. When you stop over-reassuring, you send a clear message. If you want to be in this with me, you have to show up too. And if they can't or won't, at least you're no longer abandoning yourself to keep a connection alive. When you go no contact with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, one of the most powerful shifts happens in silence. Avoidant individuals are used to emotional space. They often seek it out as a way to regulate their feelings and maintain a sense of control. But what they're not used to is the absence of emotional access to you. They're used to the dynamic where they pull away and you reach back in, where it's a text, a call, a gentle nudge, or emotional reassurance. They're accustomed to knowing that you'll be there, holding space, waiting, hoping. No contact disrupts that dynamic completely. It removes the emotional safety net they never acknowledged but always counted on. Avoidants don't often process their emotions in real time. They tend to suppress, avoid, or rationalize their way out of vulnerability. When you're always present, checking in, offering support, keeping the door open, they never really have to confront the cost of their detachment. They can emotionally withdraw without ever losing the connection. That's what makes no contact so impactful. It breaks that unspoken contract. It forces them into a space where your energy, attention, and emotional availability are no longer guaranteed. In the beginning, they might not show a visible reaction. They may appear calm or indifferent, even relieved. But that's a surface level response. Underneath, something starts to shift. Avoidants often realize what they had only when it's no longer available on their terms. Your silence doesn't just create distance, it creates contrast. For the first time, they're no longer in control of the emotional rhythm. They can't reach for you when it's convenient or pull away when it feels too close. That lack of access can create a slow but deep sense of loss, one that can't be ignored or intellectualized away. The real power of no contact lies in what it represents. It's not just the absence of words. It's the absence of emotional labor. It's the removal of the person who always showed up, even when they didn't. The slow and solid way to remove a word that may come easier than a person who always showed up, even when they didn't. And for someone avoidant, who often underestimates how much your presence anchored them, this can be incredibly destabilizing. They might not come running back. They might not even say anything right away. But internally, the silence begins to work on them. It creates space for reflection, discomfort, and sometimes regret. But this isn't about whether or not they reach back out. It's about what your silence makes clear. That emotional closeness isn't something they can pick up and drop when it suits them. That if they want to be connected to someone real, someone grounded and emotionally generous, they have to be willing to show up, not just disappear when it gets hard. No contact is not a punishment. It's a mirror, one they can't look away from. Because in your absence, they finally have to see themselves, not through your reassurance, but through the void you left behind. And often that's when the truth really starts to sink in. The most powerful outcome of no contact isn't found in whether the other person comes back or finally realizes your worth. It's found in what you discover about yourself during the silence. When you're constantly caught in the cycle of proving your value to someone who can't or won't meet your emotional needs, you slowly lose touch with your own self-worth. You start shrinking yourself to fit into a relationship that asks you to tolerate distance, mixed signals, and emotional inconsistency. At some point, you begin to think that maybe this is just how love is. Unstable, anxiety-inducing, one-sided. But going no contact breaks that illusion, not because of what it does to them, but because of what it wakes up in you. You start to feel the energy shift. The endless mental loop of what did I do wrong or how can I fix this begins to fade. Instead of managing someone else's emotions, you start listening to your own. You realize how much effort you were putting into a relationship that only offered you crumbs in return. And for the first time in a long time, you begin to reclaim something sacred, your peace. That peace isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of clarity. You begin to see the relationship for what it truly was, not what you hoped it could become. This is where real transformation begins. Not in waiting for the avoidant to change, but in recognizing that your needs were never too much. They were just too much for someone who wasn't ready to meet you where you stood. That realization is painful, but it's also incredibly freeing. Because once you stop making excuses for someone else's emotional unavailability, you start raising the bar for what you're willing to accept. And that shift, that rise in standards, doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from It's tempting to focus on whether the avoidant notices your absence, whether they regret losing you, or whether they'll reach out with a sudden epiphany. But that keeps the power in their hands. The real win is when you no longer need that closure, because you've already given it to yourself. You've chosen to walk away, not because you didn't care, but because you finally cared enough about yourself to stop settling. That kind of decision changes everything, not just how you relate to that person, but how you relate to everyone going forward. You begin to understand that peace is the bare minimum, not a luxury, that consistency isn't a bonus, it's a requirement. And most importantly, that love should feel like home, not like a place you have to constantly prove you belong in. No contact is the line you draw in the sand. Not to change someone else, but to stop abandoning yourself. When you make that choice, the growth you experience is no longer dependent on their behavior. It's rooted in your own decision to stop accepting confusion in place of love. So to bring it all together, no contact with an avoidant isn't about playing games or trying to force a reaction. It's about honoring your own worth and stepping away from a dynamic that keeps you chasing and shrinking yourself. The silence you create doesn't just break patterns for them. It creates space for your own growth, healing, and clarity. Whether they come back or not, you've already won by reclaiming your power and choosing peace over pursuit. Thank you so much for listening and being open to this perspective. Remember, the most important relationship you have is the one with yourself, and choosing self-respect is the first step to finding the love you truly deserve. Take care of yourself, and until next time, keep shining your light and never settle for less than what feels right. Thank you and goodbye.